And I personally want to learn imperfection from men. Like, that is the allyship that I would like to see around startup. I just think that's a way we can help each other. If we come from different backgrounds, regardless of gender, if we can kindly say to somebody, what you're doing is amazing and this is actually a strength of yours, but for now, how about we just skip this step or pause this for later? I think that can be really, really helpful.
Hello, Marginal listeners. So excited to have you back with us this week. This week's episode is a good one. It is with an old colleague of mine from my Meta days, and we talk through so many deep topics, but this guest also brings the levity. She's actually really funny, and it reminds me of this running joke I have with me and my husband. Actually, it's not a joke. It's a real world competition. We always try to discern who's funnier, me or my husband. If you ask me, I'm funnier. I have better comedic timing. But if you ask me between me and Kate Minogue, who's funnier, I think I have to give it to Kate. But I'll let you all be the judge of that, having listened to this conversation. Like I mentioned, my guest this week is the prolific Kate Minogue, who is an AI advisor and Fractional Chief Product Officer. This week, we chat about her early obsession with customer psychology, spurred by an early bridal shop encounter of all things, and how this actually paved the way for her career in data. We discuss her marketing science positions at Meta and how working with certain client profiles, that is, gaming client profiles, brought her very close to product out of necessity. We learned how Kate dove into fractional product roles thereafter and what led her to finally start claiming the title of AI expert, rightfully so, and inviting other, more diverse voices to do the same. She also shares what she'd like to learn most from her male allies in startup world and the importance of modeling good enough for underrepresented builders. If you're interested in the intersection of tech, humans, and society at large, this is definitely the episode for you. Kate, I cannot thank you enough for opening up our eyes to this conversation while also making us laugh through this conversation. I'm so excited for everyone to hear it. So with that, let's get into it. Kate, I was joking to you earlier. I feel like every day from here on out, I need to wake up with a Kate Minogue brain game.
Okay.
With you prompting me with some kind of like very existential product question. It really gets my brain juices flowing. And I needed it this morning because folks can probably tell I'm a little bit sick. I'm present enough for this show, but I needed a little bit of that stimulation before getting on the mic. And Kate delivered. She sent me an article on product prioritization, and thank goodness she did, because who knows how intelligible I would be had I not engaged in that before hopping on here.
You would have pulled it together. Our times won't work for it though, because I'm coming to the end of my day. I'll just send you whatever I've been thinking about during the day, and then that can get you started.
I love it. Yeah. Speaking of, I'm curious, how does Kate Minogue start her day? What is your morning routine, if you are kind of like religious about that or not?
I try to be. I think it varies by the season, but usually get up, go for a walk first thing in the morning because I live right by the sea and I love to go out and get some of that sea air first thing. And it just helps me get programmed into the day is starting. I think it's something I picked up during the pandemic when I lost my commute. And I was like, I really missed it. And I know a lot of people now in a work from home reality love not having a commute. But I felt I needed the bookending of the day to like be part of my structure and routine. So yeah, I love to just go for a walk on the pier first thing in the morning, maybe grab a coffee on the way back, and then settle in to checking emails usually first thing and just getting myself ready for my to-do list.
Your morning routine is like what I would lie to people and say my morning routine is. Like, oh, I start the day with gentle movement and some introspection. But that seems very on brand for you. I feel like you're a very methodical, intentional person. You probably plan to have enough time in the morning to do that too, whereas I wake up probably at the last conceivable minute. But I figured that's not the Kate Minogue way.
I'm more of a morning person, so you will see things falling apart late afternoon and evening. So it's just lucky that that's the time of the day that suits me better.
I love it. So we have some interesting shared history. We actually worked together at Meta.
Yes, from big tech out of the fire into a different fire. Both of us
Yeah.
happy.
From big tech to small tech, but still with some big problems.
Yep.
Interesting problems, interesting challenges. But yeah, we crossed paths there. And when I first joined Facebook, I didn't interface with you because I was in the e-commerce team. But then when I moved into the gaming vertical, back to my gaming roots, that's where we reconnected. So we were just two women in gaming.
Yeah. we were in the very small minority of the women in gaming.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was in gaming and app for my whole time in Meta and Facebook. So you had to go there to get me. I was sticking around that part of the business.
And while you were there, you were working on, I mean, we were both working at Facebook during the onset of some very major privacy changes that Apple deployed, which just had such huge implications for all of the advertisers we worked with. So it was not we were not coasting. Like, I certainly was not coasting, and I know you were not coasting
Right.
whilst you were there. So I feel like a lot of times people misinterpret like what it means to work in big tech. But yeah, during our heyday, it was not. And I do think also being in gaming too, gaming's always had its way of being its own little kind of microcosm. I That's what I love about it. I felt
Yeah.
like even within the broader ecosystem of Facebook, gaming itself almost felt a little more startup-y.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why we both gravitated towards it and then thereafter both left to pursue startup life. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really funny because like I said, I was in gaming the entire time that I was there. And I would have never predicted that I would stay in the same part of the business for so long. And I even remember when I was interviewing to join Facebook, telling what would have become my manager that I really didn't want to be put in a box. I didn't want to stay in one place. And she was like, "Oh, that will never happen in Facebook." It did, but that's because the gaming world just kept shifting around me. So I didn't
Yeah.
need to go find a different role to find a different role because the first couple of years that I was there, it was, yeah, super kind of scrappy, high growth. It was its own geography. There hadn't been, I was in marketing science, there hadn't been that much marketing science support for the gaming business before. And they did things very differently to say ecom and travel and retail in that marketing measurement space. Then you had the pandemic, which, hurt a lot of industries, but gaming was not one of them. Everyone being at home and bored was great for the gaming vertical. And then Apple made their changes, and gaming were one of the deepest and fastest hit by the data privacy changes. And that just pulled the rug out from under the industry and also, particularly, the discipline that I was working on. So, when I look back at the time in Meta, I feel like there was even four different eras of gaming within that kind of 6 year period. And it just gave an opportunity to learn a lot from product to industry to partnerships and ecosystem, data science, marketing. You touched so many different things. And I think, like you say, gaming as a vertical, and when we speak about gaming, we often kind of mean the mobile gaming industry in particular, because it was the biggest part
Mhm.
of our kind of client base. The way they operated and the fact they were very lean and the fact they were very data driven and fast moving meant that we had to mirror that internally. And like you say, I think some people potentially look at big tech and go, "Oh my God, such big teams, so many resources, all of this, it must be easy." But there's always stuff to do. It is never easy, very ambitious goals, very high performing culture, and a lot of change very regularly to deal with. And I guess unlike in smaller companies, when change happens in a big company, the impact is massive and the ripple effect is difficult to kind of respond to. So yeah, there was no boredom there.
No, it's such a good way to put it. Like, the gaming ecosystem was changing so much, so we didn't need to continually like, we were just evolving by default.
Yeah.
You really can't sit still when you work in gaming, so I feel like I as well, like, somehow I carved out that niche for myself. When I tell people, like, the work I do now, and then I'm like, "Oh, I have a gaming background," they find it so interesting, but I feel like really cutting your teeth in gaming early on gives you so much agility to work across so many different performance verticals later on. So I'm forever grateful for gaming, and somehow it always finds a way back into my life. Like,
Yeah.
I'll veer away from it and I'll be like, no, I'm e-commerce now. And then someone from gaming will reach out and be like, so what about this particular engagement? Or what about this incredible opportunity? And I'm like, darn it. I thought I had kinda cut ties, but no, it always has its way of kind of meandering back into my life. But, speaking of life and speaking of humble beginnings, Kate, I'd love to kind of understand from you, what was life like for Kate growing up, and how did you ultimately end up? Because Facebook was not your first job.
No.
You had, a career prior to Facebook too, so I'd love for you to take us a little bit on the journey of your backstory. Where did you grow up? What was childhood like? And then ultimately, how did that transition into your professional career?
Sure. So yeah, like I guess growing up, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. Like, I didn't come from a family that worked in tech or corporate or anything like that. Like, my parents, one of them worked in kind of more government roles, clerical kind of government roles. And then my mother actually worked with the church. The most Irish thing you're going to hear. So, there wasn't this kind of either academic background or corporate background for me to follow. And my sister and I used to joke that all of our cousins kind of fell into two buckets. Like, there was some of them that were very creative, art or, hairdressing, beauty, stuff like that. Or then there was a lot of teachers. We had a lot of teachers in the family. So I thought about being a teacher. And I think everybody, say maybe whether it's in my town or my school or whatever, is you go through a phase and you're like, well, the only professional I know is that person standing up there. So maybe I'll do that.
That's a job.
That's a
Yeah.
job that I know the name of. Yeah, I ultimately we have a year in school here called transition year, which is after the set of exams we do when we're like 14, 15, and before we go into the exam years of like 17, 18. So it's an optional year and you get to do a lot of work experience, which, is great. Like, it's a really practical year to help guide people that otherwise may not have any idea what they want to do. So I went to a primary school and actually went back into my teacher's class from when I was 6 or 7. The same teacher was still there. She had also taught my uncle. She'd been around. She was a constant in our lives. Um, and there was a very quick realization that I did not want to work with kids. I feel like I should have had that self-awareness before, but there was a very obvious moment where I was like, this is not for me. I'm going to have to come up with another idea. Um, so the second week of work experience, I went to a bridal shop randomly. And because I was thinking maybe fashion design is the direction that I want to go. Um, and when I came back and did the like write up of the week, my teacher said, you seem a lot more interested in the psychology of the customers than you do the dresses. So I had obviously written a whole page of a 5-page reflection on a mother-daughter pair and interaction between them in that moment. And she was like, I don't think the fashion design is the thing that's appealing to you here. And that was feedback I actually got from quite a few teachers, whether it was when I studied history or English, that there was this psychology and human behavioral interest that was threaded through everything that I did. So when I was finishing school and trying to think, what am I going to do next? It was between psychology or mathematics. It was going to be a broad subject area because I didn't have a job in mind or like a clear idea what I wanted to do. And I'd always loved maths and English, and I'd always loved, that side of things. So I decided to take the practical, risk averse mathematics route. And it was just to delay the decision as long as I possibly could and jump into the most generic, what seemed like it should be a useful degree to have. So yeah, that's what I did. I did not have a plan. I did not have, because I remember thinking, maybe I'll be a criminal psychologist, and talking to the career guidance teacher and her, which is crazy in 2024 that this is what was said. There is only one job in that in Ireland.
Mm,
So there's no point you doing that. And I just remember
okay.
being like, okay. And she was like, a woman who likes maths, have you considered engineering? And I was like, I don't really know what all the different kinds of engineering are, because when you apply for the degree, you're applying for electronic engineering, electrical engineering, like all of these
Yeah.
titles. And I remember being like, no, I don't want to do any of those. Like, don't want to do it. And she was basically just like, put this woman into engineering and we can say we sent a woman to engineering.
Exactly. Listen, we are blazing the trail with this one. We have a women in STEM
Yeah.
from our institution. We love a women in
We
STEM. Yeah.
love a woman in STEM. So I gave her the STEM, but I went with the M. So yeah, that was kind of the start of, I guess, anything professional for me. And yeah, it was like, from a childhood perspective, I just didn't have a person, whether that was in my family or in school or anything else, that had a job that I was like, I really want to do that. Like, it just did not exist. So I did mathematics. and applied math and statistics for 4 years. And a lot of my classmates were going the financial route with that. So they were all going actuary, and I was not interested in that either. So most of my decisions at that time, and I have to say for quite a few years afterwards, were avoiding things I did not want to do instead of actually
Hmm.
going towards things that I did want to do.
Just to say something about that though,
Yeah.
to your point about having a path around like kind of avoiding things you don't want to do. I feel like that's very practical because again, even when you're in college or even out of college, you'll never know what you want to do until you try the things and then realize what you don't like to do. I mean, that's how we all fall into the
Yeah.
fields we're in now. Doing something being like, well, that definitely wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And the job that I had when I graduated college, it didn't even exist when I was studying in school. So you're kind of better off not hanging your hat on a certain idea of what you want to do because much like gaming, it's changing all the time. So I think you were wise beyond your years, Kate, by just taking this avoidance tactic of yours.
Avoidance as a strategy is solid for at least 10
Yeah.
years. It's a good one. So, yeah, finished my degree, decided research and mathematics was also not for me. Academic study continuing, I was like, "Oh, no, I will die. I will die in here studying probably one of the oldest disciplines that there is. There's not going to be much
Yeah.
newness here." So I decided I needed an application, and I went back to my interest in human behavior and chose a master's degree in cognitive science, which at that time was a shared degree between psychology and computer science, and
Yep.
covered a lot of the things that are now the component parts of AI, but they weren't called that then. So I remember leaving that course and thinking the thing I enjoyed the most here was the modeling of human behaviors, like using mathematics to actually try to describe whether it's human decisions or human bias or anything like that. I just really loved it. I loved the possibility that you could do that with numbers and formulas and algorithms and things like that. But the language around data science was not, it didn't exist then. I think it was not that long later that courses started to pop up that were very
Hmm.
specifically around data science, but it still was much more foundational then, that you were doing computer science or you're doing statistics, or, you didn't have, I guess, a profession targeted course. So I took a year out and went off kind of trying to just try more things. And in that, again, got drawn towards marketing and the interest of the behavior, the decisions, the customer stuff in marketing. So there has been that thread. Like these things, you always say hindsight is 2020. Like there's a really
Yeah.
obvious thread there when you look back. And I sometimes joke that it looks on paper like I was born to be a customer data scientist, that like every decision that I made led to that. But I had no idea. It was just luck and choosing the right components, even if I didn't have the right name for them, that I was drawn away, like we've said, and towards just problems that I liked solving. And that continues to be what I try to do now.
I don't know, Kate. I'm convinced that you actually invented data science in that bridal shop. That's kind of the story I'm going to go with. I
Yeah.
think you kind of like manifested it into existence. You were like, I think there's a there there. But no, I mean, like you said, there is so much coherence when you look back at it. And it is funny now because a lot of people who are in marketing, it is really the intersection of data and psychology.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of people take for granted how much data informs marketing. And again, not to kind of belabor this point even more, but I do think within gaming knew really early that data was the fodder for marketing. A performance marketer, it like lives, breathes, and dies by data. It's like when we saw again a lot of Apple's privacy regulations come into effect and kind of compromising the fidelity of data and signal, it really crippled
Yep.
gaming marketers. For me, it makes total sense that you would end up in the field you were in having this love of data and consumer behavior. But again, that's just foresight that you had beginning at I don't know, like how old were you in that dress shop? We knew you were destined for great things. Okay, so you ultimately launched into this career in data science and you ended up at Meta. And then now I will say one thing that's interesting, Kate, is when you were at Meta and you were heading up marketing science at Meta for apps and gaming. I didn't know you had such a robust product background. And maybe this is something that has kind of culminated over time. But when I speak to you now, I feel like you have such a astute ability to kind of distill product strategy and making sure people are solving the right questions, prioritizing the right features. It's a lot of product strategy too. So I'm curious, how did that weave its way into your story?
Yeah, I think it's a funny one because this is something I'm realizing only very recently. And again, it comes back to that things we do versus things we explicitly name. You know, you won't find a role on my CV with product in the job title. Like
Right.
it doesn't exist. But if I think back to the first job that I had in data science, it was customer intelligence. So that sat between product, marketing, operations, and it was just understand the customer behavior of recommendations for decisions, for targeting, for, strategy, whatever it is. And I think that the customer obsession brings you very close to product, whether your role
Yeah.
is product or not. When I think about my role in Meta, before signal loss and Apple privacy changes became a problem, the biggest problem to be solved for those advertisers was around what we call the auction, the ad ranking system, which is what powers Meta's advertising. Because if you, and you did, like you worked with e-commerce, if you worked with advertisers other than gaming in Meta, you can see how product obsessed gaming are compared to
Yeah.
others. I often described gaming advertisers as mathematicians with marketing budgets because, like you say, they knew early on how important data was. They lived and breathed data. But the extension of that as they interact with performance marketing platforms is a really fast, deep understanding of the product on the other side. So, what are you
Mm,
building to respond to my need? And often more than we understood our product ourselves. Like they were just
yeah.
so finger on the pulse. And I think whether it is in a B2C context or a B2B2C context, which is kind of what we were in Meta, if you are always focused on the customer and you are always focused on the data and you are always focused on how decisions are made, whether internal decisions or customer decisions, product is just automatic. You can't avoid it. You can't put it to the side of the conversation. And I remember somebody else in marketing science sending me a message once and she asked me a question, you're trying to be really good with boundaries and time. And I was like, that's a question for product. And she said, well, as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, your product, because we had to immerse ourselves so much more deeply in it, in gaming, than some of the other verticals did. So, like we said earlier, when we think about gaming, you don't have a marketing conversation without having a monetization conversation with gaming because those two things are so entwined.
Yeah.
As a
Mhm.
vertical, there aren't as many degrees of separation between marketing as product and as there might be in other industries. But the explicit focus on product for me came after Meta. And it was something that I wasn't necessarily looking for. I'd spoken about it maybe at different points in time in Meta, like, is that the direction that I should go? When I was leaving Meta, my former manager, mentor at the time, said that he could see in me a desire to stop working in companies and start working on companies. And
Mm,
I had just come out of my MBA. So in my head, the word was strategy. I was like, I want to do strategy because I want to be shaping the company, guiding the direction. But when you think about where that sits, particularly in a consumer tech space, that is owned by the product. And
yeah.
I was considering going into, say, some chief data officer and data strategy roles as a very natural kind of extension of the work I'd been doing in Meta. But I found there as well, with the evolution and really accelerated development of AI progress, AI and data go hand in hand, and AI and product go hand in hand. So to future proof myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to start looking into AI product management because I think that is going to be it's going to be related to the work that I do over the next couple of years. And I loved it. And I loved the frameworks and I loved the questions. And I realized I was already asking a lot of the same questions, but not formally as a product person. So yeah, it's really evolved over the last year or so as something that the clarity has just kind of popped up for me.
I think it's so interesting because to distill it down, I think product is all about the customers. And that is something that we lose sight of so often as founders. Like, I'll speak from personal experience as a founder, and you now partner as like a fractional chief product
Yep.
officer and advisor to founders. It is so easy to lose sight of the most important thing in your tech company, which is not your tech.
No.
Your tech doesn't matter. Your ideas don't matter. All that matters is your customer, and like you said, that customer obsession, and the closer you can get to, and there's so much distraction, especially when we've talked about this, like, working with early stage founders who get obsessed with something other than customers, like, I don't know, investors,
Yeah.
right? They're spending all their time putting together pitch decks and working on positioning for investors, but not their own customers. You should be spending time active listening to your customers and nobody else in the beginning stages, and then add on this compounded distraction of AI. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about how sometimes maybe we're a little bit like tail wagging the dog when it comes to AI. And I know a lot of tech founders feel this obligation to just say that they have an AI product, and it has nothing to do with the problem they're solving or who they're trying to get close to with their solution. It's more they just want to say that they have AI because they think that will garner more investment. And I feel like that's a really backward strategy. And I feel like you might agree, but I'd like you to say it a little more eloquently than I just did.
You know what? The final, I was going to say nail in the coffin, which is just a further like Irish cynical phrase instead of there's a more
It's okay.
positive one.
Americans say it too. And I'm from Boston, so
Is there a
we
more
get pretty dark
positive
over here.
version of nail in the coffin? Anyway, the final straw for me with product was, I'll be completely honest with you, I was avoiding AI for a while. This sounds insane now, but the reason I was avoiding AI was as somebody with a background in data science, you know too much about what you don't know. Like the word
Mm.
AI experts were popping up all over the place last year that had not worked very much in this technology, in the space. And it was making me uncomfortable about the kind of advice that would be out there. And it was very trend driven, it was very hype driven. It happens all the time. So I resisted speaking much about AI at all. It's that whole Dunning-Kruger thing. It's like, the people who are really confident in it are the ones you probably want to be suspicious about. Um, and then I met a couple of founders, happened to be female, but I'll categorize them as non-technical founders for the purposes of this, who seemed really overwhelmed by all of the conversation on AI because they thought AI may be a solution to the problem I'm trying to solve, but I don't know enough to know. And I don't feel confident enough to go talk to an engineer or a CTO about this because I don't know if I will understand what they're saying. So a few of the advisory roles I took on early on were almost as that bridge or translator between technical and non-technical to try to say, okay, listen, here's what's necessary to solve your problem, or here's the order you will need to do things from a, user data AI perspective instead of jumping right into the AI first. But it became very explicit to me then that there were these kind of two groups. There was people who were tacking AI onto things because they felt
Mhm.
they had to. And it was becoming AI washing, for want of a better
Yeah.
term. And it was because they were more focused on investors, competitors, or maybe
Yeah.
even I would say a third group, and this is potentially more true in Silicon Valley, employees. They were trying to get the hottest
Yeah.
engineers, and that was the way to do it.
Mhm.
And I think there were some big releases from our former employer that were much less for the end users than they were for their corporate branding around AI.
Yeah.
And there was a pocket of founders who were like, I'm going to build an AI startup. And then there was a pocket of founders who maybe had an idea or a problem for a customer and were feeling, if this isn't an AI startup, I'm never going to get funding. So I need to
Right.
put the AI in. And that's where I ultimately moved into the kind of product space in a fractional capacity was I want to stop you from doing that. I want us to stay customer first, use case
Yep.
first, and build it so that it works even if you don't have AI. And then happy days if AI improves it. Like that's my preferred way of working with the technology because I think investors are also coming around to the fact that there was a bubble and they didn't see results and they didn't see the substance or rigor to some of those pitch decks. But I think if we are customer obsessed and problem obsessed and things like AI are beside the point, then we will be more resilient over time.
Yeah. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. And I do think, like you said, with the current fundraising environment, it's not a competitive differentiator anymore anyway. And a lot of investors have been burned by being overly bullish about AI and not looking at things like those core metrics of how do we make sure they have product market fit? Okay, how do we make sure they're demonstrating the traction? How do we make sure they can operate their business profitably? We are having a reckoning in the industry, and I do love that that reckoning is bringing us back to the customer because it's the reason that people like me and you do what we do.
Yeah.
I you had when we last spoke, you had the best take on perfectionism because, working with being a female founder, working with female founders, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before. A lot of us are perfectionists, and it's out of necessity, right? It's because we're not used to being given second, third, or maybe even first chances. So we feel that out the gate, we need to have the highest level of polish, refine. But in the startup ecosystem, that is disproportionately holding you back relative to maybe some of your male peers who are much more okay launching imperfectly. Kate, what is your take on how can we teach ourselves how to launch imperfectly?
It's so funny because like there's so many things and there's so much research that feeds into why women are disproportionately plagued by this perfectionism. And that's not to say there are not male perfectionists. But the male perfectionists that I have encountered also maybe are not crippled by it in the way that the
Right.
female perfectionists are. So even that is like we can both have this standard, but one of us is, propelled by it and the other one might be more paralyzed by it. And like when I spoke about that Dunning-Kruger effect and the fact that like, my background's in data science, I've worked with algorithms for years, I've worked in machine learning for years. And I was like, AI is not going to be on my LinkedIn. And then you see some of the people who are like, I'm an AI expert. And it was only because my husband said, for the sake of other people, will you help them with AI? You
Yeah.
holding back and being like, not my place. And on reflection afterwards, I was like, me deciding I was not qualified enough to talk about it was also gatekeeping to others and saying, like, you're not qualified enough to talk about it either. And I think that's just a reinforcement of this perfectionism and unattainable standards. And I'm not qualified enough until when actually AI really needs more voices, more diverse voices, people from different
Yeah.
perspectives. So, me deciding you have to have a PhD in this or have worked as an engineer for 10 years to do it is not helping anyone. Not helping me, fine, but it's not helping any of the other people that want to benefit from or direct AI. And I think that there's a quote in Scandal that what you just said made me think of. I'm obsessed with Scandal, by the way. I rewatch it way more often than is reasonable. And it's you have to be twice as good to get half as much or something like that. And
Yeah.
I do think it's internalized in women. Like the language around perfection is used to even advertise to us more. And it's just this thing that is in our mindsets. So I do think that when we get into an environment like a startup where done is better than perfect and just going through those really necessary iterative steps of a product roadmap or a rollout or to get feedback, if our background has said not until it's perfect, then we are coming from a disadvantage. I've seen that materialize with different people I've worked with in different places where it's like I can't put out, something that looks less than professional, or I can't put out anything less than the perfect finished product with all of the features, or, and it slows down. And again, I'm not saying this is all women. Some women are
Mhm.
amazing at scrappiness and being agile and all of those things. But I think it does disproportionately impact how we work. And I personally want to learn imperfection from men. Like that is the allyship that I would like to see around startups, because I think that instead of me worrying while I'm working on a mobile app product that there is a man somewhere who has built an equivalent in a couple of hours using ChatGPT, and he's happy to just ship that into the App Store. And I'm going to review, iteration, review. I'm like, where is the middle ground that's like comfortable enough for integrity, but also, good enough is good enough. And it's something that I think I have to fight every day because, like, we worked in a big company with,
Yeah.
a lot of reviews, with comms teams that would check every single word of things that went out. So it's an instinct you have to fight against based on the environment you've come from. And then if your natural inclination is there, then it's a doubly an instinct. But it's really funny when we hear AI will democratize startup for marginalized group. Like that's something that you hear kind of thrown around, which is like,
Yeah.
no code solutions and,
Yeah.
fast prototyping and all of those things. True in theory. But if you don't think about the natural behaviors of those people or the signals and messages they have received throughout their
Yeah.
personal and professional lives, I saw on Sat, I think I sent this to you last week in one of our early morning messages.
Brain games. Yeah.
Yeah, brain games was that women and, other underrepresented groups are not leaning into AI as much. They are not as confident that they can play with it. They are more risk averse. They are, more afraid of what they don't know. And that's actually just widening the gap because now you can't not use this technology. So if you were previously held out of startups because people said you weren't technical enough or you weren't strategic enough or whatever the reasons they continue to fund female founded startups less. And now you add to that men are more likely to put their hand up and go, I've got an AI product or I built this thing quickly. Then the gap will widen, not shorten.
Yeah.
So I think to me, that is one big red flag I have, which is the potential of AI to democratize money,
Yeah.
access to technology, the ability to start a company is only as real as our ability to acknowledge that people don't behave the same. And I think
Yeah.
if that perfectionism obstacle persists, we will see the gap widen because we need, and like that's what I'm kind of doing is like, I have a great tech partner that I'm working with, and I've said it to them, teach me scrappiness. Like, make sure I'm not over baking my suggestions. Like, if you've worked with loads of startups before, flag when you're like, it doesn't need to be this detailed, or it doesn't need that sounds more like version 3 to me. I would love that kind of feedback from either men who are more naturally like this and how they work or who have that experience because it would save me so much time. And I even remember this
Yeah.
during my MBA. So I studied part time for the last 2 years in Meta. And I remember chatting to a guy that I did a group project with going into the second year of the MBA. And he said, I'm only risking the assigned reading where it's not going to be presented in class or where there's an exam at the end of the year. And I was like, we don't have to read everything. And he was like, we don't have time to read everything. And I was like, so sorry, tell me your shortcut rules again.
Yeah.
I needed somebody else to give me the shortcut because I don't
Mm.
naturally think of the shortcuts. And then I second guess myself and go, you'll pick the wrong shortcuts and then it'll be a
Yeah.
disaster. So him just saying the simplest thing in the world to me, which is like, here's how I've cut a couple of corners and I'm not worried about it, saved me so many hours over the next year. And I just think that's a way we can help each other. If we come from different backgrounds, regardless of gender, if we have different ways of working, if we have different comfort levels or like, anxiety, neurodivergence, everybody has something that is like, here's
Yeah.
how I'm comfortable working. If we can kindly say to somebody, what you're doing is amazing and this is actually a strength of yours, but for now, how about we just skip this step or pause this for later? I think that can be really, really helpful.
Completely. I totally agree. And I think there's something so material to having that behavior modeled. Because again, talk is cheap. It's one thing to have a male peer in class or a male colleague say, I'm going to skip all these shortcuts.
Yeah.
But it is so salient when you see someone take all those shortcuts and still get the promotion. Take all those shortcuts and get the fundraising or get to product market fit quicker
Yeah.
or get customer traction, right? And that's always the thing for me because I'm always someone who's done all the homework plus the extra credit plus reminded the teacher that they forgot to assign the pop quiz, right? And that worked for me.
Yeah.
That's the thing, like, that was reinforced behavior for so, so long.
Yep.
And the only way that I could break free of that was by working with people like my co-founder to see, oh, when we launch fast and we actually launch with bugs and like all these corner cases that we probably haven't accounted for yet, customers are going to show us the way and that's going to be fine. And if they want our product bad enough, they're going to stick with us. And if they're not, that's important signal for us to gather. I think there's a whole element of like removing some ego from the process as well. Or maybe it's not ego, but it's a self worth and a worthiness problem that I feel like maybe a lot of female founders have where we're like, "Oh, if we get negative feedback from customers, that's gonna, like, degrade our reputation as founders."
You know what it is? I think you hit the nail on the head at the start, which is we don't believe we'll get a second chance. You know, there is that. I think there probably is an element of ego, especially if we have had a, successful career to date and we have a professional reputation that we take pride in, then we want to protect that. I think there's a lot of component parts. And I remember when I was taking on the part-time study and I said, okay, you can't do both of these to the level, like your full-time job and your
Yeah.
part-time study, you're going to have to step back. And I burnt out really, really severely in the first semester because I thought I did it, but I didn't do it at all. And I had a few people be like, if you just gave 60 to 80%, you'd be doing fine. I was like, I don't have proof of that though, because
Yes. Yeah.
I've never done it.
Never done it.
And
Yeah.
your point is so true in terms of like, you need to see the behavior modeled, but you also need to, who the behavior is modeled by and the results they get is important.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
another classmate that I had who used to loudly state they do none of the reading, used to let down a lot of the group projects that they were on, like would just leave them hanging, wouldn't contribute, wouldn't do their fair share. And if that was the only model that I had had of cutting corners, I would have been like, not for me, thank you, I'm out. So it was really important that the person that said that to me was somebody I had worked on group projects with and they had really contributed value and they had worked hard.
Yeah.
So I was like, I trust that both of us have a shared standard of quality and contribution. And, you are a person that I am really happy to take this advice from. And I feel safety in the things that you will tell me to cut. And I have repeatedly failed to pull back to that 60, 80% in certain scenarios because you have to experience it and know everything will be okay
Yeah.
to do it. A lot of the time, our definition of everything will be okay is also based on what we've been exposed to. So, like you said, when you
Mhm.
get that negative feedback from a customer for the first time, you can fall apart because you have not been exposed to that negative feedback because you've never allowed yourself to be. And I think, like, when we talk about the perfectionist dispositions of women, there's a great TED talk on this, and I can get the link if you want to put it in the notes or anything.
Sure.
And it talks about how boys are given much more space to fail from a young age. So they don't see catastrophe when they fail. Whereas girls don't get that
Mm.
same feedback loop. So a small fail feels like a much bigger thing to a woman because she has been protecting herself from that for various different reasons throughout her life. Like I even saw Lego pick this up in an ad last year, or this year, where they first were playing with Lego with the little girls and they're like, oh, that's perfect. And the girls tensed up. And then they were like, you know what? You just have fun. Just do it. There's no right output of this. And the girls are like, it's so much more fun when we play this way. And parents find that they're using more language around things like perfectionism with little girls than they are with little boys.
Yeah.
So it starts from a really,
Wow.
really young age. And when you add to that the fact that we don't feel like we get second chances or, we feel like we have to be so relied upon to be good enough, it reinforces. And I still think that there are female founders who are just perfect for startups despite all of this. But I feel like we could raise their possibility of success and inclusion if we could spot this and, support them through it.
You know what's crazy is, and I think this is another female thing, again, not all women, we're not making
All women, not
huge
all men.
sweeping generalizations here. Yeah, not all women, all men. When you were talking about raising children and being very tactful around language, my first thought was, and this is so sad, but I think it's good to speak it into existence and to address it. My first thought was, wow, another way I'm gonna fail as a parent. And this is like not to make this a therapy session. Like I'm not looking for sympathy, but I do think I've gotten in a lot of reps not feeling like a failure because in order to be a founder, you have to get really good at failing fast, and actually there is no failure, there's just signal.
Yeah.
And I do feel like I've gotten to a point as a founder where I don't see myself as a failure. I just see failure as part of the job. So that's great. But then there's this whole other element of, motherhood,
Yeah.
being a female and falling short of expectations there. And I think it raises another really interesting point around what are all the ways that as women we feel like we can be failing ourselves,
Yeah.
we can be failing other people, our children, like, and this is again, it's not bad that I feel this. I just think it's important that I say it and I kind of verbalize it so we can hold ourselves accountable to trying to just check those assumptions
Yeah.
and say, "No," I might say to my daughter or my son one day something about being perfect, but that's I'm not gonna mess up my children. Like, I'm not failing as a
Yeah.
parent, and I think by having these conversations and being introspective in the first place, that is the first step to kind of changing those behaviors, right? And just
Yeah.
moving through the world with that level of self-awareness is so, so impactful. So I just wanted to say that out loud and hold myself accountable to not letting myself feel like a failure both within and outside the context of my work.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like language is important and being aware of it is important, but you're also a living example of a founder. So your kids will see you live the values of fail, learn, survive.
Yeah.
And I think that has the potential to be even more powerful where we may not have had both signals growing up. We might have
Yeah.
had the counter to both. So 100% like let ourselves off the hook when we do something wrong, but also know how we can try to model what we didn't have modeled so that we
Right.
can help to save some of the little girls from the plague of perfection.
I know. I know. We're going to raise better girls. We're going to raise better boys. I'm
Yep.
so looking forward to this next rising generation. Okay, before we kind of close out with more information on kind of your current ventures, which I definitely want to create space for it in just a second. Um, if there's anything else you'd love our audiences to walk away with having listened to this conversation, what would that be?
Think it is just about being able to view the technology with the behaviors, the potential with the people, whether that is as a product leader, as a founder, as an investor. It's about whenever I talk about my consulting and advisory work, I always say my goal is to join the dots between people, strategy, and data. And it's because I think even if you're missing one of those things, you're missing something really big from that puzzle. Like you always have to look at all three. So I think that when we're looking at, why is it all men that are coming up with AI startup? I saw a post about all the funding that went to AI startups in 2023, and I commented under it, what definition of an AI startup? Because if
Yeah.
AI startups are like deep tech that is helping AI to be better, absolutely great, right time for that to be getting investment. If an AI startup is a startup that either has AI on the pitch deck or has a team using ChatGPT to create their pitch deck, not an AI startup. The metric makes no difference. It doesn't mean anything. So
Mhm.
I think it's always about asking the critical questions, asking the people focused questions, and seeing if whether you're giving the same opportunity to every person or every problem that you would if you had the full picture.
Yeah, I love it. I love that well-rounded approach. And again, just further testament to the fact that we are so lucky to have people like you in product and in data because I just don't think we get so much of this human-centered approach all the time. So, I'm so glad that your husband gave you that kind of push of
Yeah.
encouragement. Again, like we need strong male allies
Yeah.
to tell us that we are capable and we are competent and we are feeling a very big need out in the market for people who take an approach like yours. So I'm so, so glad for that. Now, Kate, clue our audiences into what you're doing right now at Freckle and any other cool things that are on the horizon with that product or any of your other ventures.
Yeah, for sure. So I split my time between fractional work with startups and some advisory. So on the fractional side of things, Freckle, a beauty tech startup, we are hoping to launch a beta product at the end of Q1 so that we can get some really, really good feedback and, test, learn, iterate, the name of the game. But the goal of Freckle is really to reduce the overwhelm that skincare has created in the last couple of years and just make lives easier, make it just less of a stress on people to-do list on a daily basis. Working on a couple of other projects, you'll laugh. I'm back in a gaming project at the moment. So we do not escape. We never escape.
Kate, I might be back in a gaming project as well. So once we close this down, we'll talk because
Yeah.
our paths are just going to keep crossing, and I'm happy for it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you back in the saddle.
And really exciting, that's also a product focused role. So aside from that, a couple of advisory pieces with different startups, just trying to give that comfort of the fact that AI could make lives easier as long as it is used in the right way. So yeah, that's me.
I love it. So we will. Oh, here's a good question as well. If folks want to get in touch with you regarding your fractional services, some of your advisory work, what's the best way that they can go about doing so?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, which is where Abby gets all of her games from me in the morning. So do reach out to me on LinkedIn or my website, kate-minogue.com has a contact form too.
Perfect. And we'll link both of those in the episode show notes along with some of the other resources you talked about earlier. Kate, thank you so much. Every conversation with you, I feel better. Like I came in sick. I feel like my immune system has been
Word.
like bolstered by this conversation. I can only imagine what you do for the companies you work with, just based on some of these short sound bites you share with me. So thank you so much for doing that for me and our audiences. Today's conversation it did not disappoint.
Thank you, Abby. I'm so glad that you invited me on.
Thank you so much for listening to the Marginal Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the team at CalPal with music by Siddhartha. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can view full episode show notes at marginalpodcast.com and follow us at Marginal Podcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.